to let me know. Should I stay or should I go?
Hey, welcome back to Pagitt Radio on AM 950 and over at PagittRadio.com. Carla Barnhill and I sitting in today on the Not Quite Right religious radio conversation. And that song reminds me of Combat Boots.
Sure.
You
yeah.
do?
Oh, absolutely.
Being graduates of high school in the same year
80s.
of 1984, the year of our Lord. I remember that song becoming popular in my friend group, the Clash. Mm-hmm. And I remember the other kids at school who already had that clothing.
Sure, the camo pants.
Yeah, and the
parachute
and
pants.
the boots, the combat boots. And I remember thinking about I don't know where to get those. It was a whole other culture that I realized I don't even know where to get that, and it raised some anxiety in me. And still, when I hear that song, I get this little sophomore in high school worry thing that kicks in.
Did you aspire to that? No,
I just remembered feeling like,
they have access.
Is that the cool new thing? And I don't even know where that comes. I've know nothing.
Yeah.
What do I know about that? Nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing at all.
That was the beauty of growing up in West Central Minnesota.
Alexandria.
Yeah, where trends were a little slower to come out that way.
So college graduation, you were hearing some Clash.
Right, I was hearing some Clash. Like, wow, who are these guys?
I don't know where to buy that. Yeah.
Right, then there's combat boots at Target.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
Good to go.
Being on the early side.
The early adapter side.
All right. Well, we're talking about. I'm going to chat a little bit about this whole death narrative in our culture because death seems to implicate religion unlike anything else. Mm-hmm. Death and politics in our current world seem to drag religion right along with it like it's nobody's business. And of course, this last week, the music world was saddened by the death of Whitney Houston, a young gal with a drug addiction. Just sad. I mean, sad at a variety of levels.
Sure.
She was fighting this for a long time, and when someone's mental health issue takes their life, be it drug addiction or suicide or other things, it's just it's a medical issue, right? So she died of something just like you die of an appendicitis burst or something. Like, just because it happens in your brain and you're engaging in the activity yourself doesn't mean it's any less tragic.
Right. Something in her body broke.
Yeah, something wasn't the way it was supposed to be. So terribly tragic, of course. But I want to chat a little bit about this common narrative in our culture where how people talk about this. Mm-hmm. Because I heard people saying on newscasts and so on, public people who were trying to go to the funeral or whatever and couldn't go to the funeral, they would say things like, well, God just wanted her to come home. Mm-hmm. This kind of language. Mm-hmm. Drives me crazy.
Yeah.
This, and we chatted about this a little earlier, Carla, and it's bothersome to me that there's a narrative. First of all, I mean, so many things about simply the phrase.
Yeah.
God just wanted her to come home.
Yeah. God needed another angel.
God needed another angel. This kind of language, which caveated for a moment, I understand that people need to say whatever they need to say to make their life work. And people are going to grieve in whatever way they need to grieve. And I get that. And I want to give people all the space in the world to grieve in whatever is going to be helpful to them in grieving.
Right.
I just don't think that could possibly be helpful to people.
Yeah, I mean, it's problematic in a number of ways.
Yeah, because you have God then being greedy, like in that narrative of the many things
selfish.
About it. Yeah, that okay, I know that this 40-some-year-old woman needed to be with her mom and with her children and all that. But in that narrative, it's like, but God just decided that God wanted to have her around
that what
instead.
God wanted was more important than what any of those people wanted or needed in their life. Yeah.
And you kind of get this thought in your head that God somehow is being selfish about that.
Right.
Yeah, and I know that but it doesn't sound to me like people want to say that. They're trying to somehow say that she's in the care of God, which great.
Yeah.
But it's just something about it kind of positions this whole narrative as being that God doesn't really care about human beings' emotional state.
Right. There's some other thing that's more important.
Right.
And God has, and even if you take it in this sort of, God has a purpose behind this. Mm-hmm. There's some greater purpose. It does, and you and I were talking about this, like you said earlier, it does kind of give this sense of, so whatever's happening to you is kind of silly.
Yeah.
That whatever's
in light of eternity.
Right. Something bigger is happening and you just don't know.
Right.
You ignorant little fool.
Mm-hmm.
So go ahead and weep your sad little tears.
Yes.
But really that's ridiculous.
And that we're all saying,
because you're ignorant.
And we're all saying, why did this happen?
Right.
But she's saying, why not? Right? This kind of, it's so great in heaven and it's so great with God and now I'm home. And that whole, your life here is really just temporary.
The holding place.
Yeah. This isn't your home. I mean, all of this language. And I just think for me as a religious person, I don't think that's the story we should be telling. I think we should be telling the story that death doesn't get the last word, for sure, right? Like, I think that's a big part of our narrative is this life isn't all, and death doesn't get the last word. Yes, I like all that. But the notion that you are going to minimize this world in order to maximize this sense of heaven or this notion of the next and all seems to me to be counterproductive.
Well, yeah, and it's tricky because I think it'd be interesting to how other cultures think about death. Like, do they have those sorts of conversations? Because we're so uncomfortable with death and with the kind of sadness and grief and sorrow and hurt that comes along with it, like both of those things, that we work so hard to find ways around actually having to just face grief or having to face loss and face pain. And so I understand the need that we have to find a way to make sense of death. Yeah. That we need something to bring us comfort when we've lost somebody.
Right, for sure.
And so, like, I get where these things come from. But like you said, some things are really not, I think they're far more hurtful at the end of the day. Like, to say that God needed another angel or God wanted her to come home, to me, then, like, how is God possibly a source of comfort? How, how can my faith be any kind of solace for me in the midst of my grief if my faith, if this God who is going to comfort me was the reason this happened?
Right, because then your emotions seem like they're competing with God's desire.
Right. So then you just feel like, well, if I trusted God more, then I wouldn't feel so sad that my child has died.
And it seems that any benefit that comes from some ultimate knowing, some heavenly, ultimate knowing. And look, the one thing we know about the afterlife is nobody knows anything
about
specific about the afterlife, right? Like, that's the one thing held in common is that we've had zero reports of whatever the human experience is after death.
There's that kid. Yeah.
Well,
wrote that book.
we've had zero reports of people who've stayed dead. How about that? Should we put it that way? So anybody who's like stayed dead for the long term, we have zero
really
reports.
Set up some real estate
for people that have moved in between, and So we don't really know. But this idea that if you're going to experience a heavenly state, that you now have full knowing and full knowledge, right? This is very often. So people are saying, well, when someone dies and they get in the presence of God, then they're able to say, now I see clearly.
Yeah.
You would think that seeing clearly should also come with a high dose of empathy to the fact that the people left in the tragedy are really having a hard time.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't minimize to the point of, well, it's just, you're grieving, you're suffering and all of that. That's nothing in comparison to the glory that beholds us.
Yeah.
I think that especially as Jesus following people, that from the vantage point that I come from, I would want to say, look, we have an absolute requirement to say that God empathizes, that God knows the pain and difficulty that comes with the only thing human beings know, which is life, having that ripped away. Like, we just need a story of God that's going to be more compelling and more connected and not making us say, your life now really isn't all that important.
Well, I read there's this beautiful statement. I think it's from Rabbi Herschel, and I'll tell you what it is when we come back.
After the break, because that little music then reminds us that we only have 30 seconds. Okay, so when we come back, we'll chat a little bit more about this. And if you've got comments, give us a call at 952-946-6205. 952-946-6205. How do we think about a narrative around death and the story of death, and what story do we tell ourselves? Doug Pagitt Radio on AM 950 and over at DougPagittRadio.com.